So the weather is changing and winter is upon us. Hi, my name is Katie from Lady Red Crafting, and I do beginner-friendly crafts, and this video has 4 fun crafts that can be crossed over between Christmas and winter. So let's jump right into craft number 1. So for this craft, we're going to start out with these fun snowflake napkins from Home Goods and some foam cones that I got at Walmart. We're going to start out by just cutting out a snowflake that will cover the full bottom of our cone. And now that we have our piece cut out, we're going to remove the bottom 2 layers of the napkin. These napkins are 3-ply, and we just want the top part of this napkin. Next, I'm going to use my Mod Podge, and we're going to paint the bottom of the cone with the Mod Podge. And we don't let this dry, we're just going to set the napkin right on top of that cone. And I just lightly smooth out the napkin until I feel it is in place. And once the Mod Podge has dried, I take my zip sander and I sand in a downward motion and remove any excess napkin. Now I set the cone aside and I grabbed a wine cork. And I'm going to take this wine cork and I'm going to cut it about 1/3 of the way down. And we're going to take that little piece and we're going to use that for putting together our tree. Before we get too far on this tree, I do want to make a hanger. So I'm just using some sheer ribbon, about 1/4 inch wide. And I tie a small knot on the bottom. And we're going to take some hot glue and just hot glue that to the tip of our cone. Now we're going to grab some hot glue and use some of that chunky yarn, and all I'm going to do is wrap this yarn around the cone, hot gluing about every 1.5 inches or so to make sure everything stays in place. And when we get to the top of the cone, cover the hook with the yarn completely and just hot glue everything in place. And now for our last step, we're going to take that wine cork that we cut earlier and hot glue that to the bottom of our cone. And now our tree is complete and it's ready to hang for your winter decor. And if you're enjoying this video, please hit that subscribe button below. Craft number 2. So I was at the Dollar Tree the other day and I saw this really cute gnome, and I grabbed some of this fabric and I thought this gnome could do with a makeover. So that's what we're going to do. For our first step, we're going to remove the hat from this gnome, and we are not going to reuse any of that material except for the little white pom-pom that was from the original hat. So do save that. Next, we're going to take the nose and remove that as well. And we're going to just paint this a more neutral color. And I'm using Waverly chalk paint in the color Mineral. And it did take me about 3 or 4 coats to get a nice coat on this, but I really liked how it turned out. Set the nose aside to dry for a little bit, and we're going to start working on this hat. And to start out, we're going to unroll the fabric that we got from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to iron it quickly to make sure any of the wrinkles or creases are completely out of that fabric. Once I've done that, I take the hat and I'm just going to kind of measure out how much fabric I'm going to need. And with this fabric, it has the nice little lines, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to cut my straight line across the fabric. We're going to go ahead and flip over our piece of fabric and flip over our gnome and place him right on top of the fabric. So for this next step, we're going to take the fabric and we're going to flip it over the back side of the hat form on this gnome. And I'm using my hot glue to glue everything in place. So while I finished attaching this fabric to our hat, I'm excited to tell you about this fun playlist I'm involved in this month. The name of the playlist is Baby It's Cold Outside, and these wonderful ladies host this every month and have a different theme. Our hosts this month are Amanda at 6 Kids and a Glue Gun, Chantel from Crafty Hints, and Brenda from Rustic and Lace DIYs. These wonderful ladies and the playlist is linked in my description box below, so please check them out and give them some love. Thank you. And since I have a little bit of extra fabric, I decided to just fold everything over and hot glue that to the back side so it looks a little bit nicer and will lay nicer against whatever surface you're going to hang your gnome from. So for our next step here, we're going to take some sheer ribbon, or you could use some jute twine or anything you'd like to hang your gnome with. And we're going to make sure that we get that looped into that little circle at the top of our hat before we glue our pom-pom onto the top of the hat and cover that up. So next, I grabbed a comb, and this step is completely optional, but I felt that the hair for the beard needed a little bit of combing, and I just combed that out and made it look a little bit neater. So next we're going to lift our hat, and we're going to take some hot glue and just reattach our nose to our gnome. Now I felt like the hat needed a little bit of a fur brim, so I had this leftover fur for some other crafts that I was using, and I'm just going to cut a strip out of this fur to be able to make a nice rim on our hat. And this fur I did get at the Dollar Tree earlier this year. And it's going to be really easy. Once you've got your piece measured out, you're just going to use some hot glue and hot glue that around the hat. And now our happy gnome is complete. I just love how he turns out. Moving on to craft number 3. So we're going to start this craft out with an ornament I got at the Dollar Tree. And we're starting out by just removing the greenery and the pine cone from this piece. And once we have everything removed, I am going to attach a hanger to it before we get too far. So I just cut a piece of ribbon, and I'm just going to hot glue that into the top of this faux pine cone. Now I have this white fur that I used for a previous craft, and I'm just going to cut a strip of this fur out, and we're going to use this as a beard for our pine cone. And so we're going to take this and just wrap it around the pine cone and hot glue it. Once the glue is completely dried, I'm going to grab a pair of sharp scissors, and we're just going to trim the fur up and around the pine cone to give it a beard shape. This next step, I just used some scrap fabric, and you can use whatever color fabric that you have around the house or in your craft room. I'm sure you collect a lot if you're like me. And I'm just going to fold the fabric to make what looks like a little brim of a hat. And now I'm going to take that fabric and I'm going to wrap that around our ornament here. And I'm just going to attach that with some hot glue. And I just am folding the fabric where I'd like to, just so I don't have to worry about the edges, to make sure it looks nice. And I'm hot gluing everything into place. And don't worry if you're covering the top of the pine cone, you want to do that. So just make this look like a stocking hat. Once you're satisfied with your hot gluing, I just went ahead and I used another little piece of scrap fabric, and I tied that around the top of our fabric to make it look like a little stocking hat. And I'm just going to tie that around 2 or 3 times just to get it to the length that I want and make sure everything stays into place. Now I'm going to go ahead and hot glue a little bead for a nose for our little gnome. And now our little snow gnome is complete and ready to display. Rolling on to craft number 4. So our next craft here is inspired by our playlist, Baby It's Cold Outside. I also really like the song Baby It's Cold Outside. So when I found this stencil a few weeks ago on Amazon, I thought, oh, I have to get it. And this stencil came in a 6-pack of multiple different Christmas and winter stencils. Using redesigned chalk paste in the color Blue Boar, and I'm going to just squeegee the paste over the top of this stencil. And if you haven't used these types of stencils before, they're a self-adhesive stencil that can be washed and reused. Now I'm going to set aside the sign to dry, and while we do that, let's make a bow. We're going to start out with 6 inches of ribbon for this bow. And we're going to make a quick little loop and hot glue that right on the back side. Next, we're going to cut another 6-inch piece of ribbon. We're going to take that piece of ribbon and we're going to fold it in the shape of a V, and this will be the tails of our bow. Now for this next step, I like to use pipe cleaner. And what I do is I take my little V shape and I scrunch up the center of my loop and I attach the two together using a piece of pipe cleaner. And I just wrap that around 2 or 3 times and then twist that pipe cleaner. And once I've done that, I cut the ends of the pipe cleaner off of that bow, and we're going to go ahead and cut another small 1-inch piece of ribbon. And using that little 1-inch piece of ribbon, I'm going to fold that into thirds and hot glue that up and around that piece of pipe cleaner to cover everything up. And once you've fluffed your bow is ready to be glued onto whatever you're working on. Going back to our sign, now that our paint has dried, I'm using some Jolene finishing wax and I'm using a lint-free cloth, and I'm just going to wipe that over the top of our paint, and this will help seal everything in. And once that is dried, I take some hot glue and I'm going to hot glue our ribbon along the top of this sign. And now our little sign is ready to hang or put on a tiered tray. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do that. And as always, craft more, stress less.